Because the GMAT was required for many of the top business schools, it was foremost in my mind that was pretty important. So I put a lot of emphasis into studying for that exam to get the best results I could.
GMAT is a good check on one's logical and critical thinking skills, which are obviously very critical to a manager and his performance in the long run. But I feel the GMAT score is it's not about getting an absolute high, but rather getting a score that complements your background and your work experience and leveraging that in your admission process.
So as far as the GMAT is concerned, I think the way the GMAT, the role the GMAT plays in the overall MBA selection process is pretty interesting, because a lot of these schools, almost all of them, see it as one of the key parameters to assessing a particular candidate. And I think that's a really good way of shortlisting people for B school, because taking a holistic view of a candidate is far better than focusing only on certain aspects like say verbal ability or quant ability. And while I was writing my GMAT as well, I was very aware that though this played an important role in my selection into a B school, I realized that this was one of the many areas I had to focus on, and this actually alleviated some of the pressure I had while writing the GMAT. So I'm quite satisfied with the way B schools take in GMAT as one of the important but not necessarily the only selection criteria for admitting students into B school.
I actually gave it quite a bit of importance, because I had read that when I was applying, the number of applicants had gone up by 40%. So the more competitive it gets, then every little aspect starts to matter more and more. So I actually put a lot of effort into the GMAT, and it did pay off because I got a good score, and I think that there's a good possibility that the scholarship I received was in part due to a good score that I have. Because your score is the first thing that an evaluator or an admissions person is going to look at. They don't know you that well, and even before they read your essay, they might form an opinion looking at your score. So it's a good idea to put at least some effort into the GMAT exam.
Before I actually got into the application process, I thought that GMAT was the differentiating factor for applicants at ISB. But once I started getting more into it towards the interview stage, I started realizing that it's more of a holistic application that's important. So I would say you would focus on GMAT, but also the rest of your application, which includes your essays and basically how you come across to the board.
Well, if you go online, it will probably tell you that the GMAT is worth 1/3 the weight of your MBA application process. I would agree to that perspective, because I feel that it is a preliminary test for you to gauge quantitative and qualitative abilities, a lot of which you will have to apply in the B school. So especially in India, it gets extremely competitive. So I think the GMAT, the weightage of 1/3 is pretty fair.
From my early interactions with the school, I was told that GMAT is important, but it's only one part of the requirement. They're really looking for sort of a 360 profile to see how strong you are across the board. So there's no upper or lower cutoff point for the GMAT. So anyone thinking of studying here, I would suggest that you reach out to the school and talk to them as early as possible, and they can give you a good guide as to what you need to do.
Well, it's not the be-all and end-all. If you get a brilliant score, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get in. And if you get a not-so-good score, it doesn't completely eliminate you from the consideration set. So it is a considerable amount of what is taken into consideration, but there's a lot more. Like if you have a decent amount of extracurricular activities, or there is something you can back up and say why you should be taken, it is going to be taken, like there is an adequate amount of weightage to that.